Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Cinderbrandt. Really fascinated by the story of our guest today, and hopefully you will be as well. Part of my background some years back was as the chairman of the National Board of Trustees of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Now, we were primarily a scientific health and research charity. We did support for our members who had inflammatory bowel disease, but we also invested a significant amount of money into a variety of projects, many of which were successful. The problem we always had was in fundraising, going out and trying to tell the proper story. And we did a variety of things, just like a lot of fundraising charities would do. But as I think about it, we could have done better. We should have done better with the number of people afflicted with these diseases. And it seemed like as we computed the amount of money it cost to raise $1, that was one of the things we always looked at. And one of the things that we'll talk about with today's guest, Aaron Coe. Aaron's company is called Future City Now, and the story is really interesting. Aaron, how did you get from where you were, coming out thinking you were going to be a music producer out of Nashville, to now working with nonprofits and helping them facilitate having enough money to carry out their mission? I really want to hear this story.
Went to college, got a degree in the music business, thought I was going to be the next big record producer on Nashville. Coming out of Nashville, I've always had an entrepreneurial bent ever since I was in the fourth grade. I started my first business when I was in the fourth grade. But then right out of college, I got very involved in the church world. So I got immediately immersed in the philanthropic nonprofit world, where we were trying to make a difference in the world, and really spent the next decade and a half either working in and around religious nonprofits, and launched some relatively big nonprofit endeavors. A lot of that work was refined in the days after 9/11 up in New York City, where my wife and I spent 9 years helping just really bring restoration and healing in those days after 9/11. And so all these experiences kind of played together, this entrepreneurial bent, this desire to want to make the world a better place and to help people. It really collided themselves. And 10 years ago, we founded Future City Now, really with the mission to help organizations with strategies that fuel their mission. And that's really what our heartbeat is yes, everybody typically comes to us. I'd say 99% come with a felt need of we need to raise more funds to do the work that we're doing. But fundamentally, I don't believe that organizations truly have a fundraising problem. They've got a storytelling problem. And so a lot of what our work focuses on is helping make sure that the organization has a clear and compelling story. They're doing great work, and they're doing such great work that doesn't need to get buried in nuance, which a lot of times, folks that lead nonprofit organizations, they're buried in the nuance because the work they're doing is complicated. And like you were talking about, serving people that are sick and disease, or a number of social issues and all these things. They're very complicated issues that the world faces. But when it goes to communicating that story to the public, you've got to be painfully clear. And what I mean by being painfully clear means that a lot of the nuance that you might share with somebody over a cup of coffee or over a meal is really not the clarity that you've got to have when you're telling your story to a large audience. And so we are always wanting to help our audience and our clients get the story clear, make sure it's compelling. And then I really do fundamentally believe a clear and compelling story matched up with the right audience, with the right call to action, you're going to raise all the resources you need for the cause that you have.
So a couple of things come to mind. I don't want to stay focused for a bit on healthcare.
Yeah.
because everywhere you look, whether it's an NFL game or World Series game, whatever it might be, there is an ongoing ask for funding some one disease over another.
Right.
All whether it's Alzheimer's or some form of cancer, a lot of diseases no one ever heard of. And are they competing for a static amount of money that they want to get to a donor at the right time? Are they bringing new donors in? Are these people that have been affected by it? And if you would, I want to kind of compare and contrast that to what a lot of nonprofits do, which is more on the social and maintenance area. I guess one of the things to think about now is food banks,
Right.
with SNAP benefits being cut off. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but
Right.
there's an immediate need that if you don't make a donation, people are going to starve. So
Right.
how do you square that? How do you look at those two things?
Well, I think that there is a reality that anytime you're communicating a message, you're communicating that message to the marketplace. And so you're competing with all the other messages that are in that marketplace, whether that's a for-profit message that's out there or a nonprofit message that's out there. I mean, it's all noise, if you will, that the consumer has to process. And I think there's a couple of things that have to be true. Again, it goes back to the clarity issue. You lose immediately if your story's not clear. If it's not clear what you do and how you're helping people, you lose immediately. So one way to stand out in a crowded marketplace is to be again painfully clear about what it is that you do and how you're helping people. I think there is a degree to which you are competing for a set amount of dollars. But I think there's a truth out there with especially nonprofit causes is you want to go find the people who care about that cause. And so part of our work is trying to help our clients understand how to go segment their audience in order to find people that are going to more naturally align with their message. So for instance, like we have one client that that they were having a very hard time raising broad appeal dollars, meaning kind of like that $35 a month type of donor. And so what we ended up doing is we put together a campaign for them. We matched them up with a series of concert tours, meaning they attached their brand with a well-known artist, and that artist cared about their cause. And so night after night, there would come a moment in the concert where the artist would take a time out and say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something that's near and dear to my heart." And so by matching kind of this cause with somebody who's already an influencer but cares about your cause, that's one way to break through the noise. And so we're always looking for ways to find those types of partnerships to give our clients, that advantage because it's a crowded space. One other thing I'll tell you that we're seeing a lot of, because you mentioned like in healthcare and really in any genre or part of the industry, if you will, what we're seeing is the rise of what we call the Collective Impact Alliance. And what that is, it's a study that was done out of Stanford a few years ago. And what you're seeing is a lot of consolidation around like-minded causes. And so let's say, for instance, that your charity is specifically focused on breast cancer, for instance. What you're seeing is that there are groups that are banding together around kind of the common mission around, say, again, breast cancer, but it could be any sort of cause. And they're aligning around, like, what's one piece of this puzzle that all of us working together could solve, and we could then communicate that to the public, and not only move the needle as it relates to this issue, but we could raise significant dollars. Because one of the things we're seeing, especially with young people, is that young people are less loyal today to the brand, to the nonprofit brand. So let's just say, the American Red Cross or the Salvation Army, whereas like my grandparents' generation, they would have been very loyal to the institutions, if you will. What we're seeing now with young people is that they are more loyal to the cause itself. They want to know that if you're going after the water crisis in the world, that they kind of have an expectation that everybody in the water philanthropic space would be working together. And so we're starting to see this collective impact alliance mentality rise up, which I think is a very positive thing. Every organization can continue to be independent, but yet they can come together in this collective impact umbrella that I think is a very positive
Who
move.
I love the idea. Who facilitates something like that?
Well, so it just depends. I mean, usually what happens is I've seen it all over the place, but usually, Gary, it's the donors. So I'll give you one for instance. We've got one client that we're working with, and there's their major donor. He had been approached by two or three different organizations in the same sector about the same project in the same place, but none of the different organizations knew that each other was working on that same problem. And so the donor was like, hey, there's got to be some better coordination. This is just bad stewardship. And so what the donor did, instead of getting frustrated or throwing his hands up in the air, he just got them all in the room and said, hey guys, we could probably have better coordination around this issue. And I think if we got coordinated, there might be actually a lot more resources toward this issue. Well, they started that process about 10 years ago of collaborating together and working together. At the time, at the time, they estimated that in order to solve this problem that they were working on, it was going to take 150 years to solve the problem at the pace they were working at. And by working together, they've now gotten that down to by 2033. So 8 years from now, this issue is going to be solved. And it was as $1 billion project when they started it, and they've raised nearly 700 million of the billion to solve the issue. And it's around Bible translation. So again, a lot of my work is in the religious nonprofit space, and so all these big major Bible translators like American Bible Society and other large, historic organizations, they've all now banded together to say, hey, we believe that everybody in the world has the right to have the Bible in the language they best understand. And so we're going to get that done. And again, the trajectory was 150 years from now, and now we're going to get it done in the next, 8 years. And so that's an example. And we're starting to see that. We're seeing it in water. So in the clean water space, you're seeing a lot of, and I don't call it consolidation because it's not consolidation. Individual organizations are still in existence, but what they are doing is they're coming together, around, a core objective within their space and say, hey, if we all put our energy on that, we could really move the needle. Now, some problems can't be
Interesting.
solved, but we can do a much better job of moving the needle in that space. And so there's a lot of positives that we're seeing.
Has fundraising been impacted, in your opinion, by the current administration stepping away from, everything from public TV to USAID to SNAP benefits to things that now have to look to the private sector to try and support? Does it seem like there's just more people or more organizations out there that are worthy looking for some way to make up that gap that the government's causing? Or how do you view that and what does that do to your efforts?
Yeah, well, I mean, it increases our efforts, right? Because a lot of our clients are impacted by these realities. I don't know that they've all fully felt the weight of it yet because it takes a while for that to fully, matriculate, if you will. But they know it's coming, and they assume it's coming. So there's a lot of groups that are getting prepared. I was with a group last week, a very large group that had been doing a lot of work on the AIDS crisis in Africa, which under President Bush, the PEPFAR initiative, you know, put a lot of money behind that issue, and we honestly, between the Bush administration and then the following administrations, we saw a lot of movement on that issue in Africa, which was amazing. And so that group is rightfully concerned about where that funding is going to come from, and so they're looking to groups like ours because they know they're going to have to diversify the funding base, if you will, if the government's going to step away. And so we have a unique advantage because, again, I've been in the religious nonprofit, the church space, and so a lot of them are looking to churches. They realize that's a massive audience. There's 350,000 Christian churches in America, and they realize that's a massive audience. If they could clearly communicate their message, then they see that as an opportunity. So I don't know that we fully felt the effect yet, but I think a lot of groups that we're working with and talk to are getting prepared.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really worries me is the continuity of whatever the mission happens to be. Because it's not just, hey, give us some money, we'll continue the mission. It takes decades to build up sufficient institutional knowledge, to
Right.
build up the infrastructure. I think about the brilliant MDs and PhDs we used to fund using NIH guidelines, and our goal was for them, we give them a 3-year grant, and our basically our assessors were NIH assessors. That's the quality of people we worked with. And we wanted them to be able to then have a successful outcome to what we funded for maybe $500,000, but get to NIH to
Right.
continue that work.
Right.
Now, the work is still valid, but the organization, we can't fund 50 people at $7 million each, which would be an NIH grant. So you've got people that are dedicated to those type of missions, whether it's scientific research or whether it's water, climate, whatever the case may be, that now are highly qualified, really motivated, but they're leaving the space where they're dependent upon external funds, whether it's the government or private donors. Have you seen some of that, or is that something you're concerned about going forward?
Well, I think here's one thing I know about humanity in general, and we could sit here and talk about a lot of negatives, but in general, when humanity sees a need, it steps up to meet that need. All you have to do is look at whatever the recent tragedy is, whether that's a hurricane or a tornado or whatever may happen. Humanity does a pretty good job of stepping up and figuring out how to serve its neighbors. Now, there's always bad actors, and we usually highlight and celebrate the bad actors. But I tell you, I'm on the ground a lot, and I see some really, really great people responding. And so I think, as a general rule, am I concerned? Well, and as a general rule, I'm not concerned because we as humans tend to adapt, and we usually find a way to serve our fellow neighbor. Now, does it present some challenges, and will it force some level of ingenuity or some level of creativity? Absolutely, because anytime there's an economic change, then it forces people to think differently about the way they're doing things. But I really believe that whenever there's a massive shift, that then it's just an opportunity to innovate. And again, and hopefully, you can continue to work things out with whatever the sources were, government sources or whatever. But I also think there's plenty of other sources that you need to go, and talk to as well. And I think those opportunities exist for sure.
So, I mean, you're working in the charitable space, the 501(c) space, which is basically nonprofits. Nonprofits are required to file certain documentation on an annual basis, Form 990s. And one of the things as an advisor that I would always do if someone was going to give money to a charity that, we weren't quite sure of is I'd pull the 990
Right.
because the IRS isn't going to do it. I mean, they really have to be egregious. And you'd see some things on there where, they took in $2 million and they paid the CEO 750.
Right.
You're like, we're not doing this.
Right.
I assume you do some sort of due diligence before you get involved with a new client.
Yeah, listen, the work that we do is all highly relational, and it's got to be a great partnership. And so, I mean, we're not going to walk in, at least knowingly, into any sort of relationship or opportunity without fully vetting the other person on the other side, because there's just too much at stake. I mean, because ultimately, whenever we work together, I mean, we're going to come up with a solution together, and then we're going to go out as a unified front and present that message to the world. And so, in a sense, even though I'm not an employee of that organization, I am a representative of it, and I'm going to be attached to it. And so, we do all of our due diligence. And you mentioned the Form 990. I mean, that is one form of public accountability, but there's a lot of others. I mean, Google's a really great friend.
Sure.
You can do a lot of research, related to that. But that's a real thing. I mean, and I would encourage anybody that's listening, if you're working with a cause or with a nonprofit, I mean, there's plenty of available information for you to go not only look at the organization, but look and see who's attached to it, see who their
Right. I
board
mean,
members
yeah.
are. I mean, that's a
I mean,
big thing for me is like look at
yeah.
your board.
I mean, I could see something happening along the lines of, I mean, it just takes one.
Right,
And people look up and say, oh, they got stuck with, this charity looked great at the outset,
right,
but in the background, so you're taking risk with every client you have.
right.
So
Oh,
you've
yeah.
been doing it a long time. I'm sure you know how to do the proper vetting. But, I'm always a little bit concerned about that. And I'd always encourage my clients, the wealthier clients, that they should give a portion away each time to causes they believe in. But you've got to do it with the same sense of purpose and belief. And I agree with you, same sense of belief as if you're impacting that end party directly.
Right,
One of the things we always looked at was how much of the donor's money is actually getting into hard research.
right,
How much is going there? And some donors would really get picky. They want to know, well, what is this override? Well, that's so the scientists can eat
right, right,
because
right.
that's going for test tubes, that's going for reagents, that's going for studies, but we got to feed the guy
Yeah,
because that's what we want him doing.
right.
And you go through and you tell that story, and I agree with you. It's got to be done. Do you see as the country, which I think is fairly divided at this point, although after yesterday, I think that math is changing, or after election day, do you see any divisions along red versus blue lines in your fundraising, or is it to the point where they're just people at the end of the day? How do you
I,
see that?
I think that people have affinities for different causes, but I tell you what I do see is when it just comes down to like pure human need, that's usually where the lines no longer exist. And that's a red and a blue issue. So again, when you're responding to, let's just call it the water crisis in other parts of the world, or more recently here at home when you're responding to a tragedy, natural disaster, those kind of things. I tend to see the lines get blurred really, really fast, on, the red and blue. But then, yes, there are causes that you may tend to one side or the other. And so that's just natural, for that to happen. So I think it just depends on what the issue is. A lot of the religious issues that we work on, religious related causes, mission related causes. I mean, there are going to be people that are interested in that, and there are going to be people that aren't interested in that. I don't really know how that shakes out, politically, because I know people on both sides that support things that we work on. But certainly, if you really dig down into it, certain causes are going to align more with different types of people than others. But I will say, as a principle, when it comes down to pure human need, the lines get blurred real fast, and I just see most people are willing to jump in and be helpful.
Do you do any work that once you identify a donor, let's say a major donor for a particular cause, does your company do any work on trying to kind of gain a profile from that donor and learn about what networks they're involved with, and are there other people like them that they can find as well? How much of that do you find is helpful?
I mean, we have the capabilities of doing those things. But increasingly, again, we focus a whole lot on relationship. And you can do a wealth screen. I mean, honestly, again, all you have to really do is Google. You don't even have to get a fancy program or a vendor for that. But at the end of the day, I just think it's highly relational. And because again, a wealth screen or a Google is going to tell you the amount of property that people own or whatever, and kind of give you some kind of idea as to what their net worth might be. And so that might be helpful, but at the end of the day, it's not the most helpful thing. The most helpful thing is that leader of the cause and that potential donor being in relationship. Here's what I always say: the last thing any donor wants to feel like is a transaction.
Sure.
They want to feel like they are a solution to the problem that you are solving. Not that they're just ancillary funder to the solution. No, they want to see that no, we are actively as a funder, we're a solution to this problem. We're part of the team, we're part of the community. And frankly, that's only developed through relationship. And no amount of background information is going to help you understand that. So again, we have those capabilities, but I'm telling you, increasingly we rely less and less on those things.
Well, you do have, for instance, especially with the ability now to kind of introduce some AI,
Oh yeah.
you do have the ability, if you've got a major donor, and let's say it's a major donor who's a contractor,
Right.
and they're building office towers all over the world.
Right.
So that contractor is basically a center of, or a pod, a river, if you will, of cash flow.
Sure.
Um, Appealing not just to that person who's invested in the cause, but that person's going to have a lot of subcontractors out there that he's been keeping afloat or she's been keeping afloat forever.
Right.
And, if that person gives you $1 million and they go out and reach out to 10 of their subs who
Right.
they've made wealthy over time,
Right.
that seems like it would be some pretty viable asks, because my guess would be that that major donor is going to have a lot more in common with his long-term subs than just
Right.
the fact they've got a business relationship. They probably view the world a similar way.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, so again, we can understand that from using different tools, and we can understand that. But I think where you're really going to get traction with that type of partnership, it's just going to be in the relationship with them. And when he, as that contractor, trusts you, and he sees that you're stewarding those resources well, then he's going to be more than willing to open up his, Rolodex, if you will, to other people, and get them involved in the thing that he cares about. I mean, we're seeing
I
that.
mean,
We see that with all of our clients. Once they get kind of
yeah.
fired up about it, then they're like, well, hey, my buddies need to know about this as well. And a lot of times those are other, like you said, contractors or other vendors that they have in their orbit that they want to get plugged in.
It's just a smart way to go. I mean, I was always, when a client would be involved in a cause they believed in, and they would say, "Hey, can you help?" My answer was always yes. If it's important to you, you're important to me.
Right.
So yeah, I'm going to help you. Of course, I'm going to help you. So I
Right.
think I agree with you. I think from a relationship standpoint, I really like what you said about at the end of it all, humans are just humans.
Right.
And if we couldn't find some way to collaborate, teach each other and learn along the way, I don't think we'd still be here.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Most people, when it's all said and done, our needs are pretty common.
Yeah.
We may have different political views, but at the end of it, we all come from the same place.
Yeah,
Um,
I was thinking about, I mean, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, born and raised. My parents live about 3 miles from where that UPS plane crashed the other
oh
day.
my.
And as soon as that happened, I mean, people ran in there to help, and nobody was taking a political poll before they went in there, and nobody was asking any of those questions. I mean, it's just humans respond, and I think that's the beautiful thing. And again, there's bad actors out there. We understand that, but for the most part, when we see things like that, people just respond to the need they see in front of them. And so I think a large part of what my job is just to help people understand the needs that are out there. And it's not going to be for everybody to respond. We can't all respond to every need out there. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, there's hundreds and hundreds of things that we could all get involved in, and they're all heart wrenching to a degree. So we as humans aren't meant to have to respond to everything. But when we have the capacity and the ability, and the need is put in front of us, and we can respond, then we should.
In a way, you're still in the music business,
Yeah.
because great music speaks to you. Great
Mhm.
music moves
Right.
you.
That's right.
Great music communicates a message subliminally, obviously, whatever it might be. And it's a message, if it's aligned correctly, it stays with you for a long time. I was lucky. I grew up probably one of the greatest periods of time, listening to bands in the 70s nobody had ever heard of. And the Who, the Stones, the Beatles. I mean, my list is forever.
Right.
And I still listen to them today, and my kids listen to them still. So
Yeah.
the message is still so valid.
Right.
But what you're doing has almost a lyrical quality, because it seems that your central focus is to distill the message in a way that's going to stay with people. It's going to
Right.
impact them. It's
Yeah.
not a transaction. It's a commitment and a song they're going to play in their head. And it may not have musical notes, but it certainly has social notes. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan. So speaking
There you
of
go. I
his
grew up in New Jersey. That a
Uh,
man.
okay, well, man, I mean, he's my favorite, and and what artists do is they develop a tribe over time, and there's those are loyal supporters, and even now that Bruce is in his 70s, I mean, still
No
very
difference.
loyal supporters, and I think in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do, it's a great parallel. I've never thought about it exactly the way you just put it, but it is true because a philanthropic cause wins when they're able to develop a community of people around the cause who are dedicated to helping eradicate whatever problem they're trying to solve. And so for us, we feel like we're the community creators or catalyst, if you will, to try to help these organizations clarify your message so because part of the thing when you clarify a message is who's in and who's out.
Yeah.
And that's good. Yeah, let's clarify that early. And then once we got the people that are in, let's cultivate that. And then let's go
Yeah.
solve this thing.
It's almost tribal in a way. I
Yeah.
mean, the minute you told me you were a Bruce fan, everything changes. I
Yeah.
mean, I still remember the first time I listened to the Wild the Innocent and E Street Shuffle
Okay. All
on a
right.
set of headphones, and I'm sitting there singing and dancing in my room. My parents thought I had a stroke. I mean, it was just, and then I lost track of how many times I'd seen him.
Yeah.
But I can go anywhere in the world, and if somebody tells me that they're a Springsteen fan, I'm down. It's almost like the only other thing I can create that to is skiing. You can go
Yeah.
anywhere in the world, you meet a fellow skier, and you got a lot to talk about.
That's right.
And it's marvelous. Aaron, thank you so much for sharing this. This is really interesting stuff, and I hope we can help you get the message out. How do people find out more about you and how they can help you, or even identify the causes that you're currently supporting? How do we
Yeah,
do
well,
that?
thanks, Gary, for having me. And yeah, I'd love to connect with anybody that's listening. If they've got, interest in what we're doing, whether you're on the philanthropic side or whether you're on the donor side, we'd love to connect those dots. But you can just visit us at futurecitynow.com, futurecitynow.com, and all the info is on there. You can get straight to me on there. I think my cell phone number is even on our
Oh,
website. So
wow.
you can reach out to me directly. But happy to help in any way that we can. And again, it's been a real privilege to chat with you. And maybe we should reconvene again, just have a whole talk about Bruce
I
Springsteen.
I would absolutely do that. I am as big a fan as you can get to. I'll share one brief story. I went to school, University of Colorado. I live in Colorado now, and my freshman year, we would have arguments among people in the dorms, and one of the guys that lived next door was a complete fan of Marshall Tucker,
Mhm.
and I was blasting Springsteen, and we'd argue back and forth. And there was a point, and I think it was 75. Yeah, it was around 75. I don't know if you remember, and I don't even know if you were alive in 75, but Springsteen was on the cover of Newsweek and Time, the
Mhm.
future of rock and roll.
Mhm. Mhm.
I went into my friend's room and the Kurt's room. I said, I don't see Marshall Tucker on either of these. I was a Tucker fan. He threw a
Yeah.
beer at me. It's like,
Uh,
God damn it.
yeah.
Of course, he became a Springsteen fan from that point forward. So,
So
yeah, I
we
can talk about him
we
anytime.
of course I mean I'm a child of the 80s, and so Born in the USA would have been the first album, but honestly, I think anybody that came into Springsteen in that era was probably more, that was at the height of his popularity, right? And so I really wasn't introduced until I think it was 2007 when they were playing at the Nassau Coliseum out
Oh,
in
you were seeing 5 hour shows.
and I was like, that's his native habitat. And
Yeah.
man, once I saw that show, like I was in. I was
Yeah, I
in.
mean, we would hear rumors that, in the late 70s, he'd pop up at the Stone Pony in Asbury Park,
Mhm.
or just get spotted somewhere, and he would talk to anybody. I mean, he was just cool about it. He's just an amazing guy. It's just, I think the world is a much better place for having guys like him in it, and I would say having people like you in it as well. You're doing God's work. I think it's awesome. Keep it up, man. Hopefully, we can talk again sometime.
All right, Gary, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Our guest today has been Aaron Coe, and a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. Look him up. Check him out on LinkedIn. Don't spam his cell phone, but give him a call. I think at times like these, we all need to dig a little bit deeper and find the causes that are really worth giving to. And I think what Aaron's doing represents that. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.